And it's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation to talk to you. This is wonderful. So today I'm actually talking about not so much my academic work, but some activist work that I've been doing over the past 2 years as a campaigner. And I titled the talk, How to Stop Promoting Pollution, Policy and Activism on Banning Fossil Advertising and Greenwashing. So I'm going to talk to you about this campaign I've been leading, which is called Fossil Fuel Ads Make Us Sick. And I brought also stickers for everybody that you can take home and share the message. But as I've kind of developed the talk, I mean, more than only this question of how to stop promoting pollution, one of the core questions, one of the key questions at the core of my talk is kind of how do we, affect ecological economics as policy in the world. So I'm an ecological economist, I'm a political ecologist. This kind of coming at this work from a position of being a campaigner. In some ways it's different because I've been doing like a kind of activist scholarship throughout my whole career, but I was actually doing it really more in terms of like outside strategies. So working with movements, as Sam said, place-based movements on the ground, strengthening their struggles and their resistances. And now I've joined an organization called the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. We represent physicians across Canada. We work on planetary health, kind of making the case healthy planet, healthy people, and using that incredible privilege that they have as doctors being able to speak about health and environment. A lot of the work I've been doing with this organization is what I kind of term more like this inside out work, or the more top down transformational work. So it's given me a very different perspective as well. So I want to hopefully have time in the discussion to kind of surface some of these questions we have of how we take this knowledge that we're creating in the academy and then translate it to the real world. And I'm also going to touch on, so the talk is really about advertising, greenwashing, economic policy, and behavior change. I'm happy to, in the discussion, surface other key questions that we really want to get through. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about this campaign. It's called Fossil Fuel Ads Make Us Sick. And it's a health professional-led campaign led by the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and really drawing, of course, from the struggle against tobacco advertising that was also led by health professionals. The core argument of the campaign is fossil fuels are killing and will kill many more people than tobacco smoke through the threats from air pollution and also the health threats of climate change. Why are we continuing to promote products which we know are so dangerous and threatening? And there's a few other arguments we also really focus in on. And just to say that, of course, this ties into degrowth, and the kind of ending advertising has been one of the core demands that Serge Latouche has been making for what a degrowth economy would look like. And he writes, advertising makes us want what we do not have and despise what we already have. It creates and recreates the dissatisfaction and tension of frustrated desire. Demand no longer centers on useful goods, but on useless goods. Advertising is an essential element in the vicious and suicidal circle of exponential growth. So degrowth has kind of made these demands, but it's being actualized today very much by many movements across, specifically what I've seen is the most activism at this point is happening across Europe. I was just last month at a sort of anti-advertising activist conference in Europe, and very exciting things happening in many different places. Here, this is like a group called Ad Free Cities that works across Europe. So, you know, they're saying our space, not ad space. And this is another group that's a big inspiration. They were actually physicians, and they've been doing subvertising and ad hacking since 1979. And they're called Bugga Up, Billboard Utilizing Graffitis Against Unhealthy Promotions. And you can see this is like an example of the type of ad hacking that they used to do way back when, kind of very, very simple alterations of ads. And their main target was tobacco ads, but they also targeted other different types of healthy ads, unhealthy ads and products. So certainly kind of forerunners, both in terms of you know, subvertising and in terms of physician activism against tobacco. And then I also grew up, you know, at the time of No Logo, Adbusters. I don't know if these ads look, these spoof ads look familiar to you. But today, of course, a lot of this sort of subvertising energy is focusing specifically on high carbon ads. And the idea that, you know, we're committed to phasing down fossil fuels, but we're still promoting high carbon and highly polluting projects. So this is, I think this is Ad Free Cities, kind of another example of the subvertising. Set free to sit in traffic, driving you into climate breakdown, right? It's spoofing these type of ads. And the latest thing is actually that a lot of cities are responding to these campaigns and banning all types of advertising. So Amsterdam was the first that banned fossil fuel ads from the metro a couple of years ago. When they say fossil ads, they're talking about ads for flights, cars, and fossil fuels. And then another Dutch city sort of included meat in the ads that it's now banning. And then Sheffield Council, this was just a few weeks ago, basically banned ads for almost everything. Cars, airlines, junk food, even alcohol-free beer, because they say, you know, it's really an ad for beer, so on and so forth. And they did an analysis and said, you know, sure, we're losing revenue, but the health benefits are so substantial that it's worth it for us. So we'll see what happens with this campaign. And of course, there's also movements to ban advertising just because of the visual pollution aspect of them taking over the city. So there's kind of a variety of arguments there. But to go back to the campaign that I've been leading in Canada, so I mean, this one focused specifically on fossil fuel advertising. Our scope is smaller because in Canada it's really an uphill battle. So we initially launched the campaign with a letter from 34 of the largest health organizations across the country, a joint letter to 5 open ministers asking for a ban on fossil fuel advertising. The way we define fossil fuel advertising was ads for oil and gas, gas utilities, petrol, and also gas-powered cars. And we decided just to kind of focus on, you know, just the 2 biggest economic sectors in the Canadian economy. You know, we're just like, okay, we'll leave the others to the side for now. And the asks were a comprehensive ban on advertising by these sectors, advertising and sponsorship ban. And the second thing that we've been working on a lot that I'm going to talk about is a robust regulatory response to addressing environmental claims, which is greenwashing, right? So right now it's really the Wild West in Canada, and basically all over the world, you'll see the type of claims that we've been fighting against, and there's really very little mechanism or way to take companies to task for their false and misleading claims that are really ubiquitous. The third one was about disclosure of health and environmental risks, and this could look like, you know, labels, you know, there's different advisories, so on and so forth. We've worked on this a bit less, but now we are asking for disclosure as part of the work on greenwashing. And as I mentioned, we really take a health-focused argument, looking at both the impacts from air pollution and comparing them to tobacco, so like the number of global deaths, and then also looking at climate impacts. So there, I don't know if you saw, I mean, of course, there was the wildfire smoke, of course, from last year, where the health impacts are difficult to quantify. There hasn't been too much research into it specifically, but in Canada during another heat storm, 619 people died in BC, so just kind of the tip of the iceberg here. So onto the greenwashing. This is gives you some examples of the type of greenwashing that we're seeing a lot from fossil fuel industry groups and interests in Canada. So these ads are everywhere. This ad, let's clear the air. This is an ad from the 6 biggest tar sands companies in Canada. So they are some of the biggest industrial polluters in history, and their ad campaign is literally called "Let's Clear the Air." So you can get a sense. And when they talk about their oil sands are on a path to net zero, they're talking about by 2050. So they have an ad campaign. They spent maybe $20 million. It's on the radio. It's in the Super Bowl, in the World Cup. They've wrapped buses around the country, ads on all the buses, nonstop on the radio, on Air Canada. It is ubiquitous. Just trying to associate in the public's mind that tar sands, that oil sands can be net zero, that oil sands can be pollution free. And actually, I think that the campaign has been very effective. If you add, when I talk to people and talk about fossil fuel ads, they will say, "What ads? I've never seen any of these ads." Because of course a lot of the ads are very subliminal. I'm sure they even designed it in that sense. But then if I say, "Oh, have you taken an Air Canada flight? Oh, do you perhaps remember something with the blue skies and the clouds?" And like, "Oh yeah, maybe I did see that," so on. So I mean, it's really getting through to people. The other ads that I don't know if, I think I read an article that it's quite prevalent also here in Vermont, is a lot of ads on renewable natural gas. So the energy company in Quebec, they have these ads in the metro and everywhere, like, what if we could make our fuel from organic waste with a banana peel? And of course, the message that is being transmitted is that the gas that comes to your home is made from compost, innocuous. So the reality is, of course, that the current fuel has, that we get, at least in Montreal, is 1% renewable natural gas. And whether it's really possible to scale that up at all, and especially to the levels that they're promising, is extremely doubtful. And then you see, just to give you a sense of the other ads that we have wrapped around buses across our country. This is, Canada, a group called Canada Action. So, they wrap the bus with a sign that says, the world is asking for Canadian energy and BC LNG will reduce global emissions. So this is the sort of messaging that people are being exposed to all the time. And of course, this greenwashing is not, it's not really aimed to sell a product. It's aimed at influencing public opinion, buying social license, influencing policymakers, and most importantly, in the case of the Pathways Alliance, getting billions of dollars in public subsidies in order to put in place their false solutions to the climate crisis. So in this case, it's carbon capture and storage. They say, well, it's not economic for us to do this on our own. Therefore, this whole plan, like the whole plan that they put forward, this getting to net zero plan, the disclaimer was about 600 words. And they said that it would only be possible if an undisclosed sum was forthcoming from the government to make sure that they could develop these technologies. So this is the context of the type of greenwashing that we've been fighting against. So what we've been doing in response is that we've launched a series of complaints with the Competition Bureau of Canada, kind of accusing these companies of false and misleading advertising. The first one we did was against the Canadian Gas Association, because they are claiming that natural gas, so-called natural gas, we usually call it methane gas or fossil gas, is clean and affordable. And this is the ad that first came to my attention. Not only, they're pushing it in new homes, which is, really unnecessary considering we now have heat pumps, so on and so forth. But they say why natural gas is a smart choice for your new home. A natural gas stove offers the best control over heat and a superior cooking experience. And our counter ad says, why natural gas is the wrong choice for your new home. A methane gas leads to your children having up to a 42% increased risk of developing asthma, which is, this is sort of recent health research, which is showing through this was a meta-analysis, that in some cases, it really increases the likelihood of asthma. And if a child already has asthma, it will increase the likelihood of suffering from asthma attacks. So this is our counter argument, and we're saying gas is not clean, it pollutes across every phase of its life cycle. So that's false and misleading advertising. So we've also put in a series of other complaints, one against gas company Enbridge, a complaint, we participated in a Greenpeace complaint against the Pathways Alliance ad that I showed you before. And the other thing we've been doing is working on reforming the Competition Act to make sure that there's specific provisions to clamp down on greenwashing. So we have made these complaints, but in reality, in Canada, it takes 3 to 4 years for the complaints to be resolved. And in the meantime, the companies are still, putting out this misinformation. And there's no guarantee that there will be a resolution. There was one case about flushable wipes, and after 3 years, the Competition Bureau turned around and said, we can't figure out what flushable means, so we're dropping the case. So they don't really have expertise in environmental issues. So we also have put out these guides on kind of laying out what are the tactics of deception of fossil fuel advertising, and then a guide for people to make complaints to ad standards of the Competition Bureau. And here are some of the strategies that we laid out in the report. I don't think I'll go into them in depth now, but if you're interested in the conversation period, we can we can circle back to them, but it includes like cherry picking, the example I told you about natural gas, when it's only 1% of their business, but it's 99% of their ads. Carbon offsets. Now in Europe, you cannot make any claim to carbon neutrality based on carbon offsets. They have a new greenwashing law along those lines. This sort of petro science fiction or future washing, it's called. Vague green buzzwords, generic terms like green, environmentally friendly, claiming things, several times, putting a tree on it, or just putting a windmill on it, very easy technique. And of course, plain old lies, which the most egregious example, I don't know if you remember the Volkswagen emissions scandal, where they just put devices in their cars that would cheat the regulators, but were actually emitting 40 times more pollution than it said. So they were marketing clean diesels. That's crazy. And here's an article about the work that we're doing that I thought was really funny at the time. 5 minutes? Oh no. So she's writing, environmental activism used to mean, getting in a ship and blocking a tanker. Now it's transitioning into more of a paperwork, bureaucracy, regulations kind of activity, she said. It's a more sophisticated activism. So I was like, great, I've become a paper pusher, but at least I'm a sophisticated one. And anyways, there's a bunch of other things we've been doing that I won't have time to talk about, working on fossil fuel promotion in schools, fossil fuel sponsorship of activities like sports, trying to get cities to ban fossil fuel advertising. But to come to the latest, the most recent thing we did was to table a private members bill together with a Canadian politician whose name was Charlie Angus. And the bill basically, it's really based on the Tobacco Act. So it's asking for a comprehensive ban on the advertising. Then this one doesn't include cars are separate, but just for fossil fuel products and industries, with the aim of protecting the health of Canadians, protecting the environment, and protecting the public from being deceived or misled about the environmental and health hazards of using fossil fuels, and to enhance awareness of those hazards. So private members bills usually don't pass. There's small likelihood, I would say, that the Liberals, the ruling party in Canada, will get behind this. But the reaction from the oil and gas lobby when we launched this bill was virulent. And to the point where the MP has been getting multiple death threats. And there's sort of like the talking points that the oil and gas lobby PR people put out was that, and the misinformation, the line of attack, well, there were several, but the main one is that because the bill is written in legalese, it says no person, it refers to no corporate person, and the Tobacco Act is written in the same way. But they sort of put out this narrative that any person who says anything positive about oil and gas will be jailed. So, the Twitter was full of people saying like, I love oil and gas, come arrest me. And it's caused, a lot of pushback. The terminology of one person from the within the oil sector that was taking his community to task. He said, you basically like kicked off the Alberta outrage machine, and this is what it looks like. But the reaction to the bill is really showing that, we're hitting a pain point in a sense. And as you know, this bill is not really about stopping fossil fuel advertising. It is about delegitimizing the fossil fuel sector as a corporate actor, to toxify them as a corporate actor in Canada and globally. So that kind of explains their reaction. Oh, and also they had, this is, different Indigenous groups, because there's increasing alliances now with Indigenous groups over resource extraction projects in Canada. So one from a fossil fuel funded group said, this is an example of environmentalists trying to keep First Nations down. It's the most racist bill since the Indian Act, most racist piece of legislation since the Indian Act. And we did get, there was quite a few articles about the disinformation that is being spread around the bill, and who's kind of, what are the third-party groups? It was similar with when the tobacco legislation came out. They will fund other groups in order to speak on their behalf. So that explains the pushback. But one of my favorite reactions from the bill was from someone named Ezra Levant. He's a very important right-wing, kind of far-right thinker in Canada. He founded Rebel News and wrote a book called Ethical Oil many years ago. And he says, private members bills, because they're often doomed for failure, are ways that ideas are injected into the system for a tryout. What's radical today is edgy tomorrow, conventional wisdom the next day, and after that, it's the law. And everything else he said in this video was complete BS. But this is I totally agree with him. And I'm like, yes, Ezra, you have a very good point here. This is a lot of what I'm trying to do. I want to inject these radical ideas into the system and make them eventually become common sense, right? So that's the question that I kind of wanted to leave you with all today. Actually, I have a whole other part of the presentation, but I don't know whether we'll go through it. But I mean, the question is, how can we inject these radical economic ideas into the system and turn them into law and policy? And I wanted to use a bit of, at the same time as this other law, we've also been working on reforming the Competition Act in Canada. And the Competition Act is where misleading advertising is regulated, but it's basically the rules of the free market in Canada. So I noticed that they were going to do a consultation, and I was like, oh, great, this is our chance to, get greenwashing kind of integrated into this act. But as I started working on it, and I was surprised to see that there was no environmental groups working on it, nobody really that is tasked with paying attention to these major economic policy changes in the Canadian landscape. So I started kind of mobilizing different groups and actors, and my mandate was really to work on greenwashing, but I'm like, since we're doing this, let's just ask to change the whole purpose of the act itself. Like, why should the purpose of the act not include elements like sustainability, health, human rights? So this was kind of one approach we took, where it's like, you ask for the whole enchilada, and then maybe you'll get in the end a small piece of it in some of the strategic way. So some learning sort of from this process was about how you have to kind of be alert to what is being what are they open to changing in different moments, at the same time without being sucked into the technocracy and limited by like the very narrow. I mean, are you going to be arguing now? Of course, in Canada, we're talking about an emissions cap, and it becomes, is it going to be at 40 or 35 or so on? So how much are you going to spend your energy on these really narrow technical aspects rather than the larger narrative changes? So of course you demand the impossible, even if you know you never get it, but you also, have other demands too that you might actually get. There's questions on coalition building, other tools that I'm happy to talk about more there. And then I think there's also a lot of challenges that I've been facing. And even when I was doing this work on competition reform, there's no research in ecological economics on competition policy. So I basically had to start from zero. There was no place to turn. There's of course the fear of reformism. So, I ended up having to write, I didn't have to, but I ended up writing op-eds saying, Canada's going to lose its competitiveness in the global economy. So I'm essentially making arguments on how to make capitalism better in a sense. And of course it goes against my ethos in many ways, but how pragmatic or reformist are we willing to be in order to get those radical changes, and how does this work together? What sort of capacity do we have? Of course, it's going to be very different if you're working at a university, and do we have think tanks that are doing this work effectively? And I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because it's something I think about a lot. How can we think strategically in the way we turn knowledge into policy? Who should the targets be? At what level? How do we differentiate ourselves from mainstream environmental economics? And I think that's a key question. And then, how do we put all of this into action? So,
can you go back to the question?
Which one?
The ecological economics question.
Yes. I'm up for questions, discussion, and it could be about this or anything else. Thank you. And let's plug for the new book.